Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Into the Dark podcast. My name is Brad Heath. I am your host tonight. We've got an outstanding guest for you. He's going to join us by phone. One of these days, we'll get him here in studio, I'm sure. But we're going to have Holland Vandennieuwenhof join us. He's a producer, writer for the documentary A Noble Lie. If you've tuned in, you can catch it on Tubi. I know that's where I caught it. If you haven't seen it, it's a documentary that covers the Oklahoma City bombing, April 19th, 1995. And for those of us who are in Oklahoma and were around at that time, you'll certainly it'll strike a chord with you if you watch that documentary, A Noble Lie. And if you weren't, if you were somewhere in the United States, and at the time it was, one of the biggest attacks on American soil, and it shook a nation for sure. So we're going to get into this. Officer Terry Yeakey is going to be the topic tonight. Sergeant Yakey and his alleged suicide and what he meant to the Oklahoma City Police Department and what he did that day and his subsequent death a year later. But first, I want to mention our sponsor for tonight, BratLegacyFilms.com. I know the crew was down in Dallas, and they were doing some interviews and getting some B-roll down there at the Star for the Dallas Cowboys. So that's some exciting stuff. But their documentary, Brat Ambition, is set to release February of 2024. It highlights the success stories of former military brats who are now everyday citizens like you and I, and their contributions to society and what it was like growing up on a military base, which is something unique to brat life for sure. So BratLegacyFilms.com, go check them out, and who knows, you might even see me there. Okay, let's get into it. This is going to be a good one, and I'm so glad we've got producer, writer, Holland Vandennieuwenhof with us. Holland, thank you for joining us, and let's talk about Sergeant Terry Yeakey.
Well, thank you, Brad. Thank you for having me on, and I thank you for showing interest in the story of Terry Yeakey, whose story has to be expanded to the fullest. We covered a chapter in our documentary Noble Lie of the experience of Terry Yeakey, what he saw, what he may have seen, and his tragic death that was labeled a suicide, which no one, even police officers here in town who have told me personally, no one believes it was a suicide. Terry Yeakey was the first officer to respond to the bombing on April 19th. He was just down the street writing a ticket when the building blew up. He dropped his ticket book, responded. He was there as the smoke, as the dust was still settling. He was the first officer on the scene, and he's credited with saving 8 lives that day, pulling them out of the wreckage. He worked in the rescue and recovery effort for hours until he was injured himself. He fell into the crater and injured his back and had to be evacuated. And long story short, he was given national coverage for his heroes in that day. And a year after the bombing, a little over a year, May the following year, he was found dead in a field with multiple wounds, and there was a very specious investigation, very suspicious investigation, that ultimately concluded that he had killed himself by his own hand. And there's a lot of evidence, a lot of eyewitness evidence, and a lot of threads that indicate that was not so. In fact, Terry Yeakey, by all accounts, was preparing to blow the whistle on many things that he felt were not being told about the bombing, about lies in the official story. And many here in Oklahoma in the law enforcement and first responder community know that he was killed, that he was murdered. And that message, that if you choose to use your platform as a hero first responder to blow the whistle, that this is the ultimate price you may pay, that message was heard loud and clear.
Absolutely, Holland, and I tell you what, that's a great introduction to Sergeant Yeakey and his involvement in all of this. But let's backtrack a little bit. This is a military veteran. He had served. He had spent time overseas, I think, in Saudi Arabia.
He served in the first Gulf War as a military policeman.
That's right. And Sergeant Yeakey is a guy who, he's squared away. That's a military term. He's squared away. He's got his stuff together. You know, he's the kind of guy that you want to serve with. He's the kind of guy that you want to have your six, and he was that guy. He not just talked it, but he walked it. He
He
joined.
was an,
Go ahead.
well, he was an exemplary officer. He was known for his meticulous reporting and his by-the-book procedures. And not only that, he was basically an icon to many in the States because he was an active member of the DARE program. He would go to schools all around the state talking to kids about the dangers of using drugs and gangs and so forth. And he was one of the largest police officers on the force. And he would just let these kids crawl all over him. He was a hero to these kids.
Right.
And I've spoken to some of these people who are no longer children who remember Terry Yeakey, and they were especially hurt and distraught when they were told that their hero had killed himself.
Right. And you mentioned him being one of the first responders, so he's got someone pulled over, and he's going through his process when an officer pulls someone over, and all of a sudden there's this humongous explosion, and not fearing for his own life, not thinking twice, he jumped into action like you would expect an officer of his caliber and a military veteran to do. And instead of running away from the danger, he ran towards it. And upon arrival, he is literally, if not the first, one of the first police cars on the scene. And it's complete devastation. There's panic. There's injured people everywhere. There's a building that looks like it could collapse at any moment. But yet he still disregards his own personal safety to go save lives.
Indeed. And he noticed, well, he performed, he was on the cover of People magazine for his heroes in that day. There was an iconic photo of him emerging from the wreckage with blood on his uniform, calling in for assistance. And he was written up in People magazine for that. But the thing about Terry Yeakey was he would not abide by malfeasance. He was known as, some officers actually didn't like working with him because he was a little too by the book. He would not tolerate anyone going outside the lines at all. I mean, I remember I was talking to his sister, and she told me once that they were, her and Terry and their nephew were out on town on his day off, and the nephew had to use the bathroom. He had to take a leak, and it was like an emergency, and his sister was like, "We'll just go behind the dumpster." And Terry said, "No, you will not do that. I will buy him a new pair of pants. He will not urinate in public." He would not tolerate any kind of funny business, even among his own family. So when he started seeing and hearing things that were contrary to what he had seen and heard, well, basically he started talking about it. He started talking to other people who had questions. He started, from all accounts, compiling evidence, and many believe this did lead to his demise.
And through his training, whether it be in the military or with the police department, they're trained to observe and report, to remember, to make mental notes, to actually take notes, to write things down. They go through a process after any type of an involvement with an officer and a civilian where, there's maybe a gunshot or there's a shooting or they had to tackle somebody to subdue them or tase them. They have to go through and they write in detail what happened and what led to that and what the ultimate outcome was. This wasn't someone who was just walking down the street and had no training in this. Terry Yeakey was fully trained and knew exactly what he needed to do while he was saving lives. And I think, and Holland, maybe you can agree or disagree with this, but I think as this is going on, the officer kicks in and tries to determine what caused this, what happened here. As I'm pulling people out, as I'm carrying people to safety, what the hell happened, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Terry was known for his meticulous report writing. He kept a video camera in his squad car of his own purchase for recording incidents. And he actually tried to get a copy of his own report about the bombing after so, and they wouldn't give it to him.
Right, and it's my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that he was told his report was too long. He needed to shorten it.
Yes, which is, usually you have to convince officers to write a longer report to add more information. They wanted him to edit it, which he refused to do. He said what he saw and what he reported was the truth about what he saw. Now, the thing is about Terry is we know that he was asking questions, but he was very careful about not publicizing anything prematurely. He did not publicize, and he was very careful about not revealing anything that might be privileged. Like, everyone knew that Terry had secrets. He would not tell his own family. When he was, at some point, he was being harassed and followed by parties unknown, and he wouldn't even tell his mother why they were following and harassing him. He would not tell them. We believe that he planned to, after he was awarded the Medal of Honor. The thing is, the day of his funeral was actually prior to that planned to be the day that he was supposed to receive the Medal of Honor, which is the department's highest award for valor. And instead of the award ceremony, they had his funeral.
Right, and within that report, I mean, we don't know. We've never read it. He was not able to obtain a copy of it. He refused to change his report, and from that point on, really, it seems as though factions within his own department began to work against him. And I know that there's a report that he had spoke to the chaplain, and all of a sudden, because he won't quote play ball, I guess he's under fire.
Yes, he was suffering harassment within the department. They were transferring him around, and at one point they gave him a squad car to drive that was like, it was like the worst car in the department. It was rickety. It had, the tires were going bad. The decals were peeling off, and the other officers were like, "What is going on?" And he would just, shake his head and laugh about it. It's like, this is what they're giving me. I mean, they were engaging in both petty and dire harassment. They were a party. He was suffering petty harassment from the department. His chaplain, the department chaplain, apparently was providing information to those who were wishing to harass him within the department. He quickly realized he had to stop talking to the chaplain. And then he was being followed. At one point, he was working on a house on his day off, and he described this incident to his mother. And two men pulled up, and they got out in track suits, jogging suits. And Terry went and hid in the woods. This is out in the country. And waited for them to go away. And at that point, his mother asked him, "Well, what is it they want? What do they want to know?" And he would not tell her.
Yeah. And it's pretty obvious that whatever he had put in his report, they wanted out. They did not want that to be his official statement. His refusal to change it sets a course that ultimately, I feel, cost him his life on May 8th, 1996, just over a year later. And it's one of those things, Holland, where you read that or you see it in a noble light, because you guys touch on it, and you think, this is impossible. Like, this can't be real. But it was very real, and his family knew that he was going through something. But Terry did something that I think a lot of us would probably do, and that's reach out to try and talk to other people who had maybe seen the same thing he saw, and try and start piecing that story together, and he did that.
Yes. One of the first things that Terry noticed when he pulled up to the building that morning of the bombing, immediately after the explosion, was that across the street there were dozens of FBI cars from out of state. Now, FBI offices, if you pay attention, they tend to buy the same model of vehicle, each office, and he knew what they looked like. And that's something he noticed, that there were a lot of out-of-town FBI agents on scene already, which is very unusual because the FBI headquarters was not in the Murrah building. It was at 50 Penn Place, which is several miles down the road. but they were already parked. There was some kind of task force already on the scene, and he described some of them as standing outside watching. So that was the first thing he noticed, but he put it out of his head. I mean, he wasn't concerned about that. He had to go into the building and help the people in there. So what we know very little of what Terry knew. Like I said, he was very careful about not divulging information, but he was working with the truth seekers directly. For example, after his death, one person I interviewed said that someone broke into his house and stole some boxes that Terry had stored there. And he didn't know what was in the boxes. Terry told him not to look in there, that it had to do with the bombing. He said, okay. And then after his death, his house was burgled and those boxes were gone.
Right. And we also know from an interview that Tanya Yeakey, Terry's ex-wife, she did an interview with Colonel Craig Roberts because there were reports that she wasn't allowing Terry to see his daughters, that they were estranged and they had no contact, and the stories around him and his ex-wife really ramped up for that year that Terry was alive after the bombing. And Tanya told Colonel Craig Roberts, and you can find this online, she told him in the interview that none of that was true. And in fact, Terry had been taken to the emergency room because he had hurt his back, like you mentioned, falling in the crater. And he was scared to death. He said, "You've got to get me out of here because they're gonna, I know, and they're gonna get me."
Yes, and also not reported is that Terry and his wife were undergoing reconciliation.
Yes, and
back together.
And for that year, I had heard during the interview with Tanya Yeakey that Terry had actually begged her to remarry so that if something had ever happened to him, his family would be taken care of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Terry was very much aware that his life was under threat, and he was unwilling to back down. That's what's admirable about him. He knew he was given the warnings several times to shut up and play ball.
Right.
And he refused.
Right.
In fact, he was planning on leaving the department after the Medal of Honor ceremony, according to reports, because he knew that he had no future. He was still going to continue a career in law enforcement, but he knew that he couldn't continue in the Oklahoma City Police Department.
Right, and I believe he had been accepted into the FBI of all things.
Yeah, he had conducted interviews and was in the process of being hired onto the FBI.
So let's fast forward a little bit here. Obviously, during this time period from April 19th, from that day forward until his death, May 8th of 96, the next year, Terry is going through a lot. He's going through a lot personally. He's trying to not get loved ones, family, and friends involved in this. He's trying to keep them at a distance because he knows that there is a potential hazard in knowing what he knows. And for this time period, there's some strange things that take place. He's being followed a lot. We know the things at work that had gone on. And all through this time period, you still have victims of the bombing who are coming forward, being interviewed. You still have Timothy McVeigh and his trial and all of those things. And so there are a lot of other things that can pull your attention away from Terry, but no one really knew outside of Terry and his immediate family and the people that Terry was in contact with. No one really knew what was going on until his alleged suicide.
Mm-hmm. No one knew exactly how much danger he was in. He was very careful about that. And for example, after his death, he had a safety deposit box in a bank. And after his death, the FBI and local law enforcement badged their way in and emptied the contents of the safety deposit box without a warrant. The bank just let them in because they were intimidated. We don't know what was in that safety deposit box. And I hate to spread rumor, but the strong rumor within the truth-seeking community here, the people he was working with, is that he had acquired a video surveillance tape of the actual bombing taking place. We don't know if that was in the safety deposit box or if that was in the boxes that were stolen out of the house. We have no idea. Like I said, it is a rumor, but the fact is that the videotapes showing exactly what happened in front of the Murrah building have never been released to this day.
Right.
The FBI claims that they're lost. They've only released fragments of video showing the truck driving down the street several blocks away, but they've never shown what actually happened in front of that building if Tim McVeigh was alone, and we have reason to believe that he was not. I'm not saying, and we don't state in the film that Tim McVeigh is innocent in any manner. Of course not. He is guilty, but we do not believe that he was alone. Everyone who saw McVeigh the day of the bombing saw him in the company of other people in the truck, and that's just not eyewitness reports. There is a Secret Service document that was leaked, and it's from a Secret Service agent writing, and he was viewing the surveillance tape in front of the Murrah building, and he states that at a certain time prior to the bombing, suspects, plural, exited the truck. And this is consistent with the eyewitness reports on the scene, including the only eyewitness who was brought to trial to place McVeigh in Oklahoma City that morning at the Murrah building. The FBI or the prosecution only produced one witness to say that Tim McVeigh was there. And she, under cross-examination, admitted that he was with other people. So who are these other people, and why do they escape official scrutiny to this day? That's the question people are asking.
Right, and unfortunately for a guy like Kenneth Trinidou, who got caught up in it as a potential John Doe number 2, that cost him his life, and that's something that I think doesn't get talked about enough either. And that's a whole nother, good grief, that's a whole nother story, isn't it?
Yes, and that story is still yet to be told in full. In fact, there's still an ongoing litigation against the FBI about the death of Kenny Trinidou. Kenny Trinidou was a prisoner who was caught up in a parole violation, and we don't believe, Kenny's brother, Jesse Trinidou, an attorney who's pursuing the litigation, was told by an FBI agent that they had mistaken Kenny for one of the accomplices in the bombing, and that Kenny's death was a result of an interrogation gone bad.
Yep.
Jesse Trinidou to this day is still suing for the release of the videotapes, and currently there is a special master investigation to find those videotapes, which the FBI claims that they have misplaced.
Yeah. Was there any evidence that Terry Yeakey had used his video camera that day?
I am unaware of any evidence that he used his video camera that day, but after his death, his video camera was never turned over to the family, and the police department made various excuses as to why they would not turn it back over, but they never turned it back over, so we don't know what was on it.
Tanya Yeakey had told Colonel Craig Roberts during their interview that Terry wanted to go back. It was 2 or 3 days later. He made her drive him down there. They were stopped by military personnel and people in ATF jackets, told to turn around, that they knew that they weren't supposed to be there. And Terry insisted that he needed to go at night so he couldn't be seen, so that he could get footage. She said that, quote, this is what Terry said, according to Tanya Yeakey, with an interview with Colonel Craig Roberts, quote, "We are going to go look underneath where the daycare had been." And he fully intended to take a video camera down there and film that area. Tanya, in her interview with Colonel Craig Roberts, was this was the first time that she had publicly discussed her life with Terry and what it was like after the bombing, and she was very, very upfront, and to me appeared as honest as could be, because she also experienced harassment. People following her, people messing with the vehicles, multiple tires flattened. And even after Terry's death, a few days later, she comes home and there's a red balloon in her house with the words in black marker, "We know where you are." So it was very brave of her to submit herself to that interview with Colonel Craig Roberts. And we might be able to touch on a little bit more of that as we move forward. But let's
Well, I
get.
mean, I like to add one more thing on that. Terry's longtime partner and best friend on the department, um, on the day that, immediately after the funeral, and this man, I'm not going to name him, but this man was close to the family, obviously. Immediately after the funeral, he went to his house, he packed up all his belongings, and he moved to Dallas.
Mm,
He got out of town.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
the message was passed.
yeah, for sure. And something else I want to add with the Tanya interview, Tanya Yeakey's interview with Colonel Craig Roberts, is that she said that 2 days prior to his death, Terry showed up to her house, tossed a VCR machine into her car, did not explain why, and just said that he needed to get these insurance papers to her as well and left. He said he would be back. She said he seemed pretty upset, and 48 hours later, he had died. Tanya said that there was a tape in the VCR, but the VCR mysteriously comes up missing within 24 hours. She said, quote, "It disappeared out of my house. It was more I was more concerned with what he was talking about. The VCR was kind of incidental. When I went back and looked for it, it had turned up missing." So, yeah, I mean that's not normal stuff, Holland. That's not an everyday thing or car keys or something that you might lose. I mean, it's a freaking VCR.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, we believe Terry was interrogated before his death, tortured, and he had no choice to protect his family. He divulged information about where he was keeping material, and that material was confiscated by any means whatsoever immediately after his death.
So let's get to it. May 8th, 1996, approximately 9 a.m. Terry Yeakey is seen exiting his apartment with approximately 9 boxes of videotapes and files. He drives to the police station where he is then seen in an argument with a former supervisor, and he's told, quote, "Drop it." Whether or not the next line is accurate or not, I don't know. But the claim is that someone is heard saying, "Drop it, or you'll wind up dead." Again, I don't know if that's accurate or not. I don't have a source on that. Um, but that morning, he is seen loading boxes into his vehicle, which, by the way, is a Ford Probe. And if you remember the Ford Probe, it's a two-door car, small. Um, it's a hatchback, compact. It was a sleek-looking car, but for a big man like Terrence Yeakey to be subjecting himself to a Ford Probe is kind of funny. But it was his car. That's what he drove, and more on the car here in just a minute. But that morning, Holland, it seems like he's on the move and he's trying to get some of his information somewhere for safekeeping.
Yes. And according to the information provided by Colonel Craig Roberts, who was a Tulsa police detective, Craig Roberts is a former Marine sniper in Vietnam. They're good friends. And he was requested by the FBI to work on the Oklahoma City case because Colonel Roberts had worked with many cases with the FBI, and they trusted him or they knew he was reliable. According to Craig Roberts, that evening, Terry Yeakey called a friend of his whom he was scheduled to have dinner with, and he told his friend that, well, I've got to take these boxes to storage, and as soon as I shake these feds who are following me, he said feds, we'll meet up for dinner. Well, Terry never made that appointment. The next morning, his car was found alongside a country road in El Reno, Oklahoma, right outside the federal penitentiary property. The Canadian County Sheriff who found found the vehicle, reported when he opened it up, it appeared to be abandoned, that there was blood almost up. It was almost spilling out of the car. There was a pool of blood in the bottom of the car. And this Canadian County Sheriff's deputy also reported that there were boxes inside the car. Later, when this car was processed for evidence, those boxes were gone. Terry's body was found approximately a mile and a half from that vehicle on federal property, on property belonging to the penitentiary, the federal prison there in El Reno. It wasn't, within sight really of the prison. It was just basically cow pasture, but it was still officially property of the federal penitentiary, and thus became a federal investigation. But his body was found with multiple wounds, cuts, slices. These were not marks of suicide. He was being cut up. And these wounds were packed with grass and dirt as if he'd been dragged. I've actually, I'll go ahead and say it. I've actually walked the route from his vehicle to where his body was found. And yes, I trespassed on federal property to do this, but I did it. And that terrain is very rugged. There are gullies, several gullies that I had to cross that were almost head high. You would have had to, traverse this harsh terrain while bleeding. And mind you, he had sickle cell anemia. It's unlikely he would have had the energy to do that under his own power, which is an indicator of why his wounds were packed with dirt and grass. He was being dragged. He was found with a bullet wound to the head. The entry mark was the upper portion of the skull, and the exit wound was the lower jaw portion on the opposite side. A very inconvenient way to shoot yourself. It looks more like an execution, someone standing above him and shooting him. There were no powder burns on the wound, which indicates either that the gun was far enough away that it did not leave powder burns, or more likely that there was a suppressor involved. And the gun was not found until much later. When the FBI arrived, when they found him, they knew they had a police officer with a bullet wound. Law enforcement responded in force, and they were combing, basically doing a police call through the entire region, looking for the gun, shoulder to shoulder almost, and they could not find it. Then the FBI comes in, takes control of the investigation because it's federal property, and Special Agent Bob Ricks shows up in a helicopter, walks into the woods, and comes back later with a gun in his hand, saying he found it, which would be great, but they never performed ballistic tests on this weapon.
Right.
So the murder, or the suicide as they call it, was never properly investigated.
Right. And there's a ton there to discuss, and thank you for going through it. And I know for some people, this may be tough to hear, and this is the part where it does get brutal. And for anyone joining us late, Holland Vandennieuwenhof is joining us. He's a writer, producer on A Noble Lie, the documentary about the Oklahoma City bombing. You can catch it on Tubi. I suggest everybody go watch it immediately, and let me know if it angers you as much as it angered me. And we wanted to dive into Terrence Yeakey, Officer Terrence Yeakey, and his death because it is ridiculous. To think that this man did this to himself is just ridiculous. So you mentioned it being on federal property, and I think that's important because, like you said, there was a ton of police who had shown up and were combing this area. Now, what was it, a mile and a half from his vehicle where the body was found, where Terry was found?
Approximately a mile and a half.
Approximately a mile and a half. Through a culvert, barbed wire fence, hard terrain, rough area. He had lost minimum 2 to 3 pints of blood, and somehow had the strength to walk a mile and a half, and then decides to shoot himself. Now, I'm not right, and I'm not a detective, and I don't pretend to be, but I'm smart enough to know that the story just doesn't add up, and because it's on federal property, the police officers who are there are told leave. and they're told this is a federal investigation. You're on federal property, and magically the gun appears. How amazing is that? And by the way, who else gets a a a helicopter arriving to their demise?
Exactly. Apparently, it was a high priority case for the FBI to cover up, and I don't say that lightly, but they did. They covered it up, and Officer Yeakey was murdered. He was a hero. There's not perhaps 1% of the population who would stand up to that level of deadly harassment, dire harassment to his life and those of his family, and still continue to try to do the right thing. And yet he did, and he paid the ultimate price.
He did. He absolutely did, Holland. And I think you guys, not only with Officer Terrence Yeakey, but with this whole story of this tragic bombing that takes place in Oklahoma City at the Murrah building, which, by the way, when I joined the Air Force, I MEP'd through that building. There's a military entrance process that you go through, and when I joined the Air Force, that was the building that they had MEPs in at the time. And while serving in the Oklahoma Air National Guard, I had actually gotten a phone call the day of the bombing. After it happened, they activated the recall roster. They got all of us recalled in. I was at the base within 24 hours in Oklahoma City at the Will Rogers Air National Guard base. And we were poised and ready to go provide security at the site of the bombing. And we were put on hold. And we were put on hold for a couple of days. And then finally, there was probably 3 or 4 of us. We decided we're going to go take a look on our own. And we go down there. I think it's probably 3 days into the bombing, and there's a perimeter set up. There's everything that you would expect in a tragedy like this, and people are working. People are gawking, taking pictures, doing all the things that you think some citizens would do. And I can tell you firsthand, Holland, and I don't know if you were around for it or not, but I can tell you firsthand. When I walked up and saw it, I'm not an explosives expert. I loaded cargo on airplanes. But when I saw the building, to me, it looked like that building was blown up from the inside out, not from the outside in with a truck. Of course, at the time, we didn't know what it was, the Ryder truck and all of that. At least I don't remember knowing that. And looking at it, one side of it, if you're looking at it straight on, be the left side, was completely gutted. It was just completely gone.
Well, one thing we go into in the documentary, and I won't get into too deep here, but the damage to the building was asymmetrical to the crater. It did not line up with the crater at all, and that's not an amateur analysis. Air Force General Benton K. Parton performed a bombing survey of the damage, and General Parton has spent his career at White Sands Missile Range exploding things. He's one of the inventors of the smart bomb. He worked on the Bomar missile and so forth. He was an expert in BDA, bomb damage analysis, and he issued a report saying that the only possible way for the damage at that building to have occurred was by charges placed interior on certain key columns, which he named. And he's not the only one. The Air Force itself conducted a simulation of the Oklahoma City bombing following the incident at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. And we cover this in the film, but their conclusion, the Air Force's own conclusion, was that there were bombs inside the building. And that perhaps is what Terry Yeakey was trying to gain evidence for when he went there a couple days afterwards to get footage, or he attempted to get footage underneath the daycare, because unfortunately many of the charges that we believe were placed in the section where the daycare was, which was tragic.
Yes, very, very tragic. It's still to this day, when April 19th rolls around, you're always reminded of it, just like we are of 9/11. And, to this day, I think I immediately go back to that time period and being on the ground and seeing it firsthand, and the anger that everybody felt and the confusion in the community. And, I mean, just a few months after that, we actually took a short deployment to Seattle. We were up there for a couple of weeks, and when you told people you were from Oklahoma City, their immediate question, of course, was, "Were you at the bombing?" I mean, it affected the nation. Um, Holland, tell me again, who were some of the people that helped you on this documentary? Who were some of the people that you worked with on it?
Yes. Well, my co-writer is Wendy Painting, Dr. Wendy Painting. She actually wrote her PhD thesis on the bombing, and she has released a book called "Aberration is the Heartland of the Real," and it's an examination of the life of Timothy McVeigh and his role in the bombing, and all of the loose ends that the government refused to pursue. And she still continues her work. She's still in the field conducting research. Richard Booth is another researcher. He did not help with the film itself, but to this day, Richard is one of the premier publishers on material related to the bombing. In fact, he just released an article on the Jesse Trentino case covering that. And all of the truth seekers here in Oklahoma City, that's who we gave thanks to in the film, because the first people to come out forward and say that the government was lying were people inside the building, people who had lost people in the building. Those were the original truth seekers. And they went out there and they put a lot on the line. They suffered many of the same harassments and threats that Terry Yeakey did. And it's to them, those people on the ground, that we all owe a debt of thanks, because without them, much of this information would not have been released. The brave people of Oklahoma, some of them did stand up. Charles Key, for example, State Representative Charles Key, was in the state legislature and led an effort. He convened a grand jury, which was sabotaged, but he formed the Oklahoma Bombing Investigation Committee and issued a report called Final Report, detailing all of the evidence that the government was lying about the bombing. And I want to be very clear, we're not trying to say that the government bombed their own building. We don't know what happened. What we do believe is that a number of government-paid informants were in the circle that McVeigh was in also, and assisted him, or maybe were his boss. We don't believe McVeigh was in charge of anything. And we believe that the cover-up has mainly to do with the fact that, that government informants had their fingerprints all over this. And in fact, Charles Key himself has stated that he demanded and gained an audience with a staffer for one of the senators for Oklahoma at the time. And this staffer told him that their brief from the Justice Department was that the Oklahoma City bombing was a result of a sting operation gone bad, that it was supposed to be stopped. They were supposed to be arrested beforehand, and somehow that just did not happen. The informants turned the tables. They were neo-Nazis, and it was basically cover-up from then on, to cover their own butts. And that was the impetus for much of the cover-up.
Well, Holland, when people watch A Noble Lie, you guys did such a great job of laying out the facts of what we do know and interviewing individuals who were not only on the scene, but individuals who were experts in their field, individuals who could add something to this story. And again, I encourage everybody, go out and watch A Noble Lie. You won't be disappointed in their work. Holland, you said it best. All those people who suffered through the tragedy and all the people who are trying to find the answers deserve all the thanks. And Officer Terry Yeakey's family, I think, deserves a thank you as well, because his work and his sacrifice hopefully will not be in vain, and hopefully one day we'll get some answers for Terry.
We will.
Holland, I appreciate you. We're going to stay in touch. I know you've got some other things in the works that we're not going to talk about right now, but one of these days we will. And who knows, maybe one of these days I'll get you to come up here to Tulsa, come to the studio, and we'll sit down and do this in person.
I look forward to that.
Sounds good, Holland. Thank you, sir. I'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Holland Vandennieuwenhof. And I mean, you heard it. You heard what he said. I've got all the notes right here that I've compiled. Terry Yeakey's death was not a suicide. It doesn't take M&E's office. It doesn't take a doctor to tell you that. It takes common sense. A person doesn't put a gun to their head here and shoot themselves. Just doesn't happen. Here's some of the details of Terry's death, and I want to give a quick disclaimer that you heard Holland touch on it. I want to give a quick disclaimer that it's gory. It's something out of a horror movie. And if you don't want to hear this, this is when you stop the video. Inside the car on a country road near El Reno, there is a Canadian County Deputy Sheriff who rolls up on the car around 6 p.m., notices that it's abandoned, goes to the vehicle, and immediately notices that there's blood everywhere. Doors, seats, floors, dash, it's covered in blood. He sees a razor blade that's lying on top of the dash, and there's no body, there's no person in there to be found. He tapes it off, calls it in, tapes it off. They immediately begin their process, right? You run the tag, you try and figure out who owns this vehicle. Here's what we know. His body was found approximately 1.5 miles from the blood-soaked car. It was his car. It wasn't a cruiser. It was his personal vehicle. A razor blade's found on the dash, and an unexplained bloody knife, no one knows if it was his knife, is found in the closed glove box of the Ford Probe. Basically, what they said on the scene was that when they opened the door, the blood was dripping from the door. It's alleged that Officer Yakey, Terry Yeakey, cuts himself 11 times, both arms, cuts his neck twice near his jugular vein, then decides that that's not enough, and losing 2 to 3 pints of blood is not enough. That he's going to get out of his vehicle. He's going to walk 1.5 miles approximately through rough terrain, through a barbed wire fence, through a culvert, and then he's going to find a spot to shoot himself. After his death, of course, we know that the Canadian County Deputy Sheriff rolls up on it. Police converge on the scene. They search the field. They find Terry's body. But they can't find the gun. No murder weapon, as Holland alluded to. They can't find the gun. So they're searching and they're searching. The feds show up. A helicopter shows up to the scene. Because it's on federal property, the local police are told to leave. And then right after the helicopter arrives, and you heard Holland discuss it, a weapon's found. Small caliber handgun. The car's never dusted for prints. No real autopsies ever performed. As far as we know, there's very little blood found near Terry where his body lie. So after losing 2 to 3 pints of blood in the car, he takes the walk, right? Creeps under a barbed wire fence, wades through a culvert, 1.5 miles away, shoots himself. Not with his service weapon, not with his Glock 9mm, but with a small handgun that he had apparently kept or had, allegedly, on his person. Both forearms are cut up, throat's cut in 2 places. And as Holland mentioned, Terry had sickle cell anemia. and losing that much blood, I think I've done the research on it. You would probably pass out. Now, Terry's a big guy, strong guy. Maybe he can make that walk. But hold on. So it's quickly ruled a suicide. Dr. Larry Baldwin, or Balding, I'm sorry, Oklahoma's chief medical examiner quickly rules it a suicide. The ME's field investigator, Jeffrey Legg, also reported that Terry had been drinking heavily. I don't know if that's true or not. And so the body is then removed and taken to a funeral director. Now, while this is going on, the family's finding out what's happened. There is some denial that Terry's throat was ever cut, but I think they proved that later. In fact, the funeral home had to stitch him because the cuts were so deep that he was leaking fluid. There was no burn mark, powder mark on the head of Officer Yakey. And you heard Holland say either it was from a distance or it was used with some type of a suppressor, silencer. If you go back and look at what the body had actually gone through, there's handcuff marks on the wrists, there's rope burns, there are grass, dirt packed into the cuts on the arm. To me, that signifies someone being dragged. If you're crawling, I don't know that you're going to pack dirt and grass into cuts. Maybe you are. Some of the cuts had severed tendons, ligaments. And so the family is notified, and you can imagine what they went through. There are other people who believe to have had evidence, not necessarily from Terry, maybe from Terry, but there are other people who were outspoken and had evidence who unfortunately ended up dead as well. Those individuals we're not going to name today, but I will tell you that one person that Terry was very close to, Dr. Charles Chumley, is one of them. And it's worth looking into. That's all I'll say. I mentioned that Terry's wife, Tanya, had experienced some things. Her house was broken into. She's been harassed multiple times. She's been followed. I don't even know that she will submit to an interview at this point. Sister Vicky Yeakey is quoted in saying that she screamed out he didn't take his own life. Someone murdered him upon being told by the OCPD that he had committed suicide. You can almost hear that in your head, hear her screaming that. Another sister, LaShawn Hargrove, said he was an awesome older brother. He was always all about his work, and he was very serious about being a cop. When she heard the news of his death, she dropped her phone and just began to sob, as you can imagine. The family deserves answers. This guy was, in my opinion, not just a police officer, not just a military veteran, but the fact that his own department was going to give him the Medal of Valor just 3 days after his death. He was scheduled to get it on the 11th. He died on the 8th. and what he did that day, as someone who had been on the ground just a few days after the initial bombing. I looked at it and have no idea how anyone survived. And Terry saved numerous lives that day before subduing himself to an injury which caused him to go to the hospital. So, where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us with a lot of questions. And it leaves us with a really foul taste in our mouth, because when you do your own research and when you look into this, I think you're going to see and read some of the same things I've read. And you may or may not be able to talk to some of the people that I've talked to. But I was told, maybe don't do this one. Maybe skip this one. Maybe it's not worth it. Why bring the heat onto yourself, so to speak? But I think that those of us who speak out the loudest, I think it's our responsibility. So I wanted to bring this one to you. Thank you to Holland Vandennieuwenhof again for joining us on Noble Lies, the documentary. Please go check it out. There's also a Facebook page for Officer Terry Yeakey. I encourage everyone to go check that out and to drop a line of encouragement to the family. They're still dealing with this. This took place in 1995 was the bombing, his death in 96. A lot's happened since then. And Terry deserves our attention. His family deserves answers. And hopefully, one day, somebody knows something. Maybe enough time has passed for you to come forward. Maybe enough time has passed and you want to get this off your chest. You want to tell the truth of what you know about what happened that day. Whether it's April 19th or May 8th, 1996. If that's you, come forward. Come forward to Holland. Come forward to me. Let's get the truth in the light, and let's see if we can't do something positive for this family. Well, that's going to do it for us here at Into the Dark, and Aaron the Baron producing tonight. I appreciate his effort. And be sure and check us out. Go follow us on Spotify. Go follow us on Anchor, Google Podcasts, anywhere you get your stuff. Then do all that other crap that everybody always tells you to do. Hit this, smash that, check this box, whatever it is. Whatever. That's not what's important tonight. What's important tonight is that everybody go check out the Terry Yeakey Facebook page. Everybody share this, and let's get the word out about what happened to him. And that's going to do it. So we got another show coming up pretty soon. I will make that announcement on Facebook for you guys to see. And that's it. Have a good night. We'll talk to you soon.